My name is Emily. I'm 38 years old. All my life I've been trying to make the right choices. I wanted to be a strong woman who could stand on her own 2 feet. I studied business at university and worked for years as a marketing specialist for a big company. But life doesn't always go as planned. My first marriage ended in disappointment. For many years I devoted myself to my work and decided not to think about love. Then I met David. He was 12 years older than me, a successful investor. A man who had spent his whole life planning everything down to the smallest detail, guaranteeing everything. He was strong, charismatic, and most importantly, he gave me confidence. When I was with David, I felt I was in a protected world. He cared for me, he took care of me. When I decided to marry him, I believed it was one of the best decisions I had ever made. But David had a past. He had a 19-year-old son from a previous marriage, Nathan. When David and I started dating, Nathan wasn't a big part of my life. He was living with his mother at the time and, according to David, he had a very strong relationship with her. I liked seeing how much he loved his son. The fact that he was a good father made David even more valuable to me. But I didn't know much about Nathan. He talked about his son in a protective way, but avoided talking about him in depth. Then we got married, and everything changed. Nathan said he wanted to live with his father until he went to university. David was very happy about this. He was excited about spending more time with his son. I thought it was a good opportunity for us to become a family. But from the first day Nathan moved in, things didn't go as I expected. Nathan was a tall, broad-shouldered, hard-edged boy. At first glance he looked a lot like his father, but there was always a hint of sarcasm in his face. When he first saw me, he held out his hand without any expression on his face. "Hello, Emily." His voice was deep and cold, as if spoken to a stranger. I thought her cold demeanor would change with time. After all, I wasn't her stepmother. It was natural for her to dislike me as a sudden intruder in her life. But I had good intentions. I wanted to win her over. I wanted to be like a family. I did my best to get closer to her. I tried to find out what she liked. She liked to play games. She spent hours on the computer. He went to the gym. He was interested in fitness. I cooked his favorite foods, tried to talk to him about school, but every time I took a step towards him, he would pull back. And over time I realized that Nathan wasn't just avoiding me. He was also watching me. At first, when I realized this, I thought I was being paranoid. But over time I realized I wasn't wrong. Sometimes I would feel him standing behind me in the kitchen while I cooked. When I turned around, he would act as if nothing had happened. When I was watching something in the living room, I could feel his gaze on me, but when I turned back to him, he would immediately turn his eyes away from the screen. Once, I saw him watching me in the mirror. In the big mirror in the living room, I realized he was looking at me. When our eyes met, he suddenly looked away, but something stirred inside me. Was it just anger? Or something else? David didn't notice his behavior. He found his son's distance from me meaningful, always saying to me, "Give him time, Emily. He's a bit rebellious, but he'll get used to you." So I waited patiently. But I knew something was wrong. I was doing my best to reassure him, but the uneasiness was growing inside me. The distance between Nathan and me was like an invisible line. The closer I got, the farther away he got. But at the same time, the farther away I got, the closer he seemed to get. David traveled a lot on business. When he was gone, it was just me and Nathan at home, and at first I didn't mind. We had to learn to live as 2 adults in a big house. But as time went on, I started to feel Nathan's presence more and more. First of all, I started to notice where he was at all times. Even though the house was big, it was as if I could see him around every corner. On my way to the bathroom, the door to his room was open and he was sitting inside, his face illuminated by the pale light of his computer screen. He looked up as I passed and our eyes met, and he went back to his screen without saying anything. Some nights, sitting alone in the living room, I would hear her footsteps upstairs, wandering aimlessly through the hallways. One evening I was having a snack in the kitchen when Nathan suddenly came up to me. He was wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes were sleepy but his expression was relaxed. "I can't sleep," he said. "Some nights I can't sleep either," I smiled. Nathan opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water, looking at me as he unscrewed the cap. "When's Dad coming back?" "Friday." He nodded but didn't say anything. I realized then that it was strangely quiet, the yellow light from the kitchen accentuating the sharp lines of Nathan's face. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a cold but mysterious gaze. He was not my son. I tried to push the thought out of my head, but somehow Nathan was looking at me differently. I could feel it. A few days later, David was away on another business trip and we were home alone. We were watching something in the afternoon when Nathan came into the living room and sat in the chair across the sofa. He had his phone in his hand, but his gaze was on me. "What are you watching?" "An old movie," I said. He squinted at the screen, then smiled slightly. "The kind my father liked. Do you like it?" I shrugged. "Sometimes." Nathan smiled slightly and tilted his head to the side. "Are you happy with Dad?" His question hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Hadn't I thought about that before? Was I happy? Yes, David gave me peace. He offered a safe, stable life. But excitement? Why do you ask? I asked. Nathan smiled and stood up. Just good night, Emily." As I lay in bed that night, Nathan's voice echoed in my head. And there was a voice inside me whispering that I couldn't ignore this any longer. The tension between Nathan and me was growing more and more intense, like electricity hanging in the air. At first I didn't want to admit it to myself. After all, he was my stepson and I was David's wife. But deep down inside I felt that some boundaries were blurring. David's departure for a week-long business trip took everything to a whole new level. The first night everything was normal. We didn't see much of each other. But on the second night, things started to change. I was sitting in the living room in the afternoon, reading a book. Nathan was supposed to be upstairs in his room, but I looked up and saw him standing at the top of the stairs. He was watching me. We locked eyes, but this time he didn't run away. I felt uneasy and I got up and went to the kitchen, under the pretext of having a drink. But Nathan followed me. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked. There was something in his voice. A challenge, like maybe he was playing some kind of game. "Sure," I said, trying to stay calm. She leaned against the kitchen counter, crossed her arms. "Did you marry my father out of love?" I was surprised. "Where did that come from?" He shrugged. "I don't know. I never thought my father would marry someone like you." Anger bubbled up inside me, but I didn't let it show. "I love David and he loves me. We're good together." Nathan smiled slightly, tilted his head and looked into my eyes. "Really?" I wanted to say something, but I was speechless. "This boy." No, he wasn't a boy anymore. I understood that. The distance between us was shrinking. I could feel the way he was looking at me, how he was trying to get closer, but it wasn't right. I had to do something. I had to end this game here. But this closeness made my heart race. As I struggled with this inner conflict, Nathan suddenly leaned in closer to my face. "Can I tell you a secret?" he whispered. "You trust me more than you realize." I gasped. "What do you mean? You're my husband's son." "Of course I trust you," the words came out hoarsely. Nathan laughed sarcastically at my words. He ran a hand through my hair that had fallen over my face and tucked it behind my ear. Our faces were so close. "Yes, I'm your husband's son." His eyes were on my lips. I stood there. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to push her away, but I couldn't. My eyes slid to her lips. What were we doing? Nathan brought his lips to mine and I could only whisper, "Nathan, please stop." But he had no intention of stopping. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I was losing myself. Nathan moved his lips to my neck. He wasn't kissing me. He was just moving his lips. My heart felt like it was going to stop. "Nathan," I said in a whisper again, but my voice sounded more like I wanted him to keep going than I wanted him to stop. His kiss hardened, a small moan escaped my mouth and we both lost ourselves. Nothing would ever be the same again. After that day, Nathan and I never talked about what had happened between us. It was hard for me to be in the same house with him and not talk to each other. I didn't tell David anything. He didn't know what had happened between us. I was happy with him, but I don't know how I could continue our marriage after something like that. After a while, Nathan moved to another city for university. Sometimes he came to visit, but there were cold walls between us. He didn't say anything about it and neither did I. I wanted to talk to David but I couldn't. How could I live with this burden? Should I tell David everything and end the marriage, or should I pretend that nothing happened?